I can tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a representative from Richmond, but also a bicycle and alternative transportation program coordinator for BCU as my job, and in my free time I help with a couple of bicycle organizations, including Rag and Bones, the like nonprofit, and whatever other advocacy and things I can do for alt transit. I've been with CTAC for some years. I don't actually know how many, but we went through the pandemic. Now we're on the other side of it, I suppose, back in person. Good to see you all again. Hello. We'll start with the roll call and the certification. All right.
Town of Ashland, Mr. Martin. Mr. Root.
Here.
Thank you. Oops, sorry. Charles, Chesterfield County, Mr. Ridgewine. Richland County, I'm sorry.
Here.
Thank you. I'm hearing an echo.
Yeah.
Goochland County, Mr. Basham. Mr. Goyne. Hanover County, Mr. Rasnick.
Here.
Newkirk County, Ms. Guthrie. Mr. Moyer. Powhatan County, Mr. Powers. City of Richmond, Mr. Bunn.
Here.
Chair Erickson.
Here.
Ms. Allman. Mr. Smith. Chamber RBA, Mr. Easter. NAACP, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Willis. League of Women Voters, Ms. Weisiger. Here. Ms. Rosenblum. RABA, Mr. Burnley.
Here.
Mr. Hamilton. Office of Equitable Transit and Mobility, Ms. Rowan. RVA Rapid Transit, Ms. Walker.
Here.
Mr. Hankins. Senior Connections, Mr. Williams.
Here.
Sorry, that threw me. Virginia Association of Railway Patrons, Mr. Testerman.
Here, but I'm now representing Virginians for High-Speed Rail. They've folded into them.
Thank you. I think I changed it on our membership list, but not on my roll sheet, but I'll take care of it.
Okay, thank you.
VCU, Mr. Leonard.
Here.
Mr. McClellan. And Virginia Conservation Network, Mr. Gordon. Ms. Higgins. That concludes the roll call for attendance.
Okay. Thank you. Next up, the approval of the June 8th, 2023 CTAC meeting minutes. Can I have a motion to approve?
Motion.
Go ahead, second.
I'll do it.
Okay.
Okay.
So moved. Consideration of the amendments to the agenda. Oh, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
That motion carries.
All right.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Any amendments to the agenda?
Yeah, usually ask for, if there's any, I'm not aware of any amendments to the agenda.
No amendments? And then we'll move to open public comment. Are there any folks here or otherwise online who would like to make any?
We have some members of the public online, but no one has indicated they wish to offer comment. So
Okay.
we're good.
Okay. I don't have much to report in the CTAC Chair's report. I will say that Lisa Guthrie did a wonderful job kind of investigating what CTAC's role will be and to have some more concrete deliverables. And the Plan RVA staff is continuing to work on an increased task list. And so they'll be talking to the chair of the policy board. So by next meeting, I think we should know a little bit more about that and what we can do better to serve the policy board and deliver on that. Does that sound good? All right. In that case, we'll move to the RTPO update.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to turn everybody's attention to page 8 in the agenda. This is a one-page agency update for the Richmond Regional TPO. The July 6th was the latest policy board meeting, and this is when our annual elections take place. At this meeting, Chris Winslow from Chesterfield County was elected as chair for fiscal year 24. And Canova Peterson from Hanover County was elected as vice chair for fiscal year 24. We did remove the October 5th regular policy board meeting, just in anticipation of member schedules and the ability to generate a quorum. There were a number of tip amendments. Those are shown on the page related to a couple different projects. I do want to note that the third bullet under the tip amendments, the north-south, what's labeled as bus rapid transit line, it's not actually an amendment for the bus rapid transit line. It's more like supportive infrastructure for bus rapid transit. So because that project, as many of you are aware, is that planning process is still underway. GRTC has not completed their feasibility study for the north-south BRT line, so it would be premature to do anything with the tip until there's actually a route selected. So there are a number of other things that are going on that were reported on at the policy board meeting. I think a few things of note: the West Broad Street BRT corridor analysis, which was directed by Plan RVA staff, was completed and adopted by the policy board. So that is available for review on our website. And if you want more information, please let me know or let staff know, and we can be sure to pass that along. It's a very exciting, basically an analysis of westward expansion of the current pulse route from the Willow Lawn area into Henrico County. We did have a couple other things on the agenda there that you can review, and then looking at future meeting topics. A number of these things, as Ms. Erickson mentioned, are kind of in review for more expanded interaction and review by CTAC. So as we start to think about scheduling out meetings for the next year, I think there's going to be lots of new opportunities for CTAC to be engaged and responsive to the policy board. If there are no detailed questions, page 9, the next page, is an update on the CBTA and work that's been completed so far. I don't have a whole lot of additional detail to provide here. There is a wayfinding plan that the CBTA has funded. This is being performed by a consultant to look at unified signage and directions and those types of things for the fall line, which is it's going to pass through 5 different jurisdictions in the region, 43 miles. So you can imagine that we want some kind of unity and unified directions for how to interact and use the trail. So that plan is being developed. There was the initial kickoff meeting was on the 23rd of June. We actually held a second meeting this past week to take that a step further, and these are mainly oriented towards giving the consultant direction and making sure that all of the things that are scoped out are being adhered to. So far, it's going well, and there's work being done. If you want to go back and watch the meetings, they are all recorded. They are live streamed, but we have them on our YouTube channel. If you want to go back and see what types of details are engaged with the Fall Line Trail wayfinding plan. Both the Technical Advisory Committee and the Finance Committee meetings were canceled for July, and we expect those to pick back up in August with fairly hefty agendas. Those dates are at the bottom of the page. So Actually, the Fall Land Trail Working Group is actually August 2nd, so that's an update that needs to be made there. But then the 9th and the 14th for Finance and TAC. That's my update. You have to take any questions?
Chet, question for you. On the fall line discussion, was the topic of creature comforts brought up? Things like water fountains, permanent toilets, those things that make your experience that much nicer.
It's being brought up in multiple venues. There's a vision plan that's being developed by sports packers that's kind of independent of the funding through CVTA. And I think that's gonna be probably the more likely spot for those types of furniture to be discussed.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, again, water fountains,
Yep.
toilets, things that require maintenance and a budget. You put a bench in,
Right.
there's not a lot to do to it. And I gotta tell you, I get a lot of complaints from people on the Capitol Trail. They don't have those facilities, so if your nature calls, you gotta go out in the woods, and I don't think we want that.
No,
And
I understand, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. I think that's part of the sports packers
Okay.
vision plan.
Okay,
Wayfinding plan is strictly wayfinding. What's the signage gonna be, where the destinations, where the area is gonna point, those kinds of things.
Thanks.
And that's really being pushed, to be honest, by the jurisdictions who are ready to start construction. I mean, they're working their way through design, and Reico's gonna be ready to start putting things out to bid this fall, is our expectation. So we wanna make sure that there is that kind of guidance is part of their construction documents.
follow-up question, but again, to fund that, that's gonna be coming out of TA, or in other words, it's not gonna be coming out of private dollars, so wouldn't that ultimately have to come through Plan RVA to be funded? Because we're not expecting sports backers to pay for all that, are we?
No, it'll come through the work that the jurisdiction will put together. So everybody's gonna have a different
But
approach.
that'll ultimately have to get signed off here, correct?
If it's regional money,
Yeah.
it will. If
Okay.
it's
Well,
local money,
if you
it
keep an
won't.
eye on it, like I said, that's a
Yep.
big miss if we don't do that, in my
Yep.
opinion.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you for that. Next, I suppose we'll go to the resiliency and emergency management planning.
Right, we have two presentations today, Madam Chair, both by our staff members here, Nicole Keller and Katie Moody. And I'm not sure who wants to go first.
I'll go first. So, do you want to go first? Yeah, I just need to share the screen. All right. All right, here we go. All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Keller. I'm grateful to be here today to give you an overview of the resilience efforts at Plan RVA, which began April of last year, and tell you a little bit about where we're going and what we're doing and answer your questions. So first off, the question is, what is resiliency? What do we mean when we talk about this? Scientifically, it means a system's ability to absorb and disrupt and return to, absorb a disruption and return to homeostasis. And I use this half pipe and ball metaphor to describe any kind of system. So the wider our system is, so our half pipe U, the longer it would take for a disruption to that ball to return to homeostasis. The higher the walls of our system, our little U shape, the greater a disruption we can return from, right? Our ball will not escape the entire system. So we want to make sure that our system is narrow and tall, essentially. So the APA, the American Planning Association, has a definition for resilience, which is the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems within a city to survive, adapt, and grow, no matter what kinds of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience. This is a little bit broad in my opinion, and so I prefer the EPAs. So when I'm talking about resilience, This is the definition that I am using, which is the capability to anticipate, prepare for, and respond to and recover from significant multi-hazard threats with minimum damage to social well-being, the economy, and the environment. So we are living in an era of compounding crises. The Earth Systems Governance Group, which is a research group, has put out a study that calls this a form of turbulence comprised of interconnected stresses and shocks with unpredictable outcomes. And they call on researchers and planners around the globe to pull on interdisciplinary understanding to better understand how these forces interact and affect our daily lives. So here at Plan RBA, resilience has always been part of our consideration, but perhaps a little bit piecemeal. And so as we have moved into this era of compounding crises, and we've come to this realization that we need a centralized strategy, which birthed the resilience position at Plan RBA last April. And our goal here is to mitigate and plan for the effects of climate change, because climate change exacerbates every other challenge that we face. Any threat that we face is both an environmental, social, and an economic challenge. So in the greater Richmond region, the top natural hazards of concern are, in this order, extreme heat, flooding, storms, extreme cold, drought, and wildfire. This is not an exhaustive list, of course, but these are at the top of mind. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time now talking about the first two, which are our primary forces of concern here in Plan RBA and what Plan RBA is doing to address them. So heat. Heat is our number one top concern here because it is the primary weather-related killer in the United States. It kills more people yearly than floods, than hurricanes, than tornadoes combined. However, it is a little bit difficult to quantify this, often because when somebody turns up to a hospital, they can be coded for something specifically heat-related, like heat stress, heat exhaustion, but oftentimes they're suffering from something else, and their cause of death or their health concern when they come in is cardiovascular related or respiratory related. But we see in the data that we have spikes of these kinds of health problems along with spikes in temperatures. So we know that what's happening is extreme heat often pushes people into a health crisis that they wouldn't necessarily be facing if they weren't living in an extreme heat moment. So in Richmond, I'm sure we all know this already, it's very hot and humid here. It can be pretty miserable. We have a phrase that we like to say here in the South. You can say it with me. It's not the heat that gets you, it's the exactly. But heat is not evenly distributed across our region, and our historical areas of redlining continue to suffer from higher heat temperatures today. That historical disinvestment in these communities led to areas with less green space and trees, but also with a housing stock that is literally worse at keeping the inhabitants cool and comfortable. So this is a little bit of data I wanted to share from Risk Factor, which is a product out of First Street. It also agrees with estimates from heat.gov. This shows the forecast essentially of the type of extreme heat we can expect here in the Richmond region. Today we have roughly on average 70 days of above 90, feels like temperature, I should say, a year, 21 days above 100, and only about 7 days where it feels like 105. In 30 years, those numbers are going to rise tremendously. So basically we're looking at entire months where it feels like it is over 90 degrees and several weeks where it feels like it is over 105 degrees here in the Richmond region. First Street estimates that the sheer increased need to run cooling in our buildings will increase Richmond's electricity demand by 14.3% alone. So this is a big challenge. Heat also compounds other crises, going back to that point we made earlier about we're living in this era of compounding crises. Air quality is highly related to heat, and I think we've all lived through that pretty recently with the air quality concerns from the wildfires in Canada. It's also related to drought, which can stress our agricultural sector, wildfire. It increases the incidence of infectious diseases and pandemics, especially those that are vector-borne. Where heat and transportation meet is where I want to spend a little bit of time talking with you all today. I call these two frenemies. Impervious surfaces, especially asphalt, are the primary cause of what we call the urban heat island effect, which I think is probably a phrase most of us are familiar with by now, but it refers to when our built areas are significantly higher, experience significantly higher temperatures than our non-built areas that are close by. And it's because of all that re-radiated trapped heat in the materials that we use to build our cities. I actually just came from the EPA Virginia conference yesterday, and there was a presentation on the Cool Streets initiative in Silver Spring, Maryland. And the contractor that worked on that project shared some really interesting data. They had actually measured the surface temperature of different materials in downtown Silver Spring during summer months. And they found that asphalt and red brick, which are the most common materials that we all use, right, were the hottest. They were the most extreme trappers of heat in the summer, and they were regularly, on average, over 120 degrees Fahrenheit to the touch. I also wanted to point out that interacting with the transportation infrastructure is where most people experience extreme heat. If you think about walking to your bus station or a metro station if you live in DC, or waiting on that bus, or just walking to and from your car, getting in your car when it's 1,000 degrees in there and you can't even touch your steering wheel because it's so hot. So it deserves special attention from the transportation perspective. We've also found recently that extreme heat shortens the lifespan of those materials that we use to build our streets and sidewalks and buildings, especially asphalt, and it can crack concrete just as badly as ice can. But we're experiencing those high temperatures more so than the ice these days. So we're realizing that there's a longevity concern on that as well. The asphalt, it really just gets sticky, as you know, as it warms up, it can get so gummy that it can actually cause a little bit of danger. And increasingly, this, as you can see in this picture, airport tarmacs have had to be sprayed down because they get so hot and so sticky that the planes can't taxi very well. That image in particular comes from the international airport in the Netherlands, but the Washington Post has an article about the topic in general if you want to read that. We're also finding that the extreme temperatures can warp metal structures such as bridges and railroad ties, and there have already been many instances around the world where that has caused significant failures, and infrastructure has had to be temporarily closed to be repaired, or it's just not safe to travel on for certain days of the year. So what is Plan RVA going to do about this, essentially? So we are starting with an extreme heat mapping project from, we have a grant for this project from DOF. We are using remote sensing from satellites to measure surface temperatures across the entire region. Richmond City already has pretty good heat mapping data, which was done by the Science Museum in 2017. We're using a slightly different methodology and expanding it to the entire region. We will identify those hot spots, and then we are also going to use a model called the INVEST model that measures existing heat mitigating strategies or ecosystem services that are on the ground, so we can find those gaps which are essentially areas of opportunity for intervention. We'll also look at some of the social vulnerability of those hotspots and opportunity areas across the region. This project is set to be due in June 2024. So next summer, we should have some results. Other work that Plan RVA is engaged in right now against heat, we're part of the Greater Richmond Continuum of Care work group, advising on the development of a new plan for providing emergency shelter to unhoused individuals during times of extreme weather, including extreme heat. We're supporting tree planting projects throughout the through the Chesapeake Bay WIP grant, and promoting heat safety and preparedness through MACV, which I believe Katie's going to talk about a little bit next. On to the second climate concern, which is flooding. Flooding is the costliest climate threat in the region in terms of dollar values. It does the most damage to our infrastructure. And this may be old news to everyone, but we typically divide types of flooding into 3 categories. Fluvial, which is your bodies of water breaking their boundaries. Coastal flooding, which includes both the chronic stress of sea level rise, but also the acute stress of storm surge coming onto our land, and also includes tidal events such as king tide flooding. And then the final is pluvial flooding, which is your stormwater nuisance flooding that occurs in your neighborhood and floods your basement. So we have already published this flood risk mapper that is designed to help individuals, businesses understand the flood risk that they face in their localities. So this is live on our website now. You can go and put in an address and turn on and off many different layers to understand the kind of flood risk that you face. And this includes dam inundation, as well as that fluvial flooding from the 100 and 500 year floodplains, as well as some storm surge modeling for different types of coastal storms that may hit and impact us upriver. What this project does not include, though, is the pluvial flooding that we talked about. And that's the flooding that we actually experience most often on a day-to-day. It's what closes our roads every time we have a downpour, causes people to not be able to back in and out of their driveway, that kind of thing. But because this isn't related to a body of water, it's really hard to measure and track. So to try to address this, Plan RVA has begun a project with the NASA Develop team, which is a free technical assistance program. And that team at NASA is using an Earth observation data, as well as some vector data, to try to model where that pluvial flooding is likely to occur under different precipitation scenarios. They will be finishing up that work in the next couple weeks, and we expect to be able to present the results of that this fall. The next steps after we have those results is to do a little bit of ground truthing, which actually we did a little bit ad hoc recently. The NASA team came and visited us, and we kind of drove around to some spots that anecdotally we knew were problem sites in Southside Richmond, and in fact did see that those were marked on their initial model outputs as potential problem areas. So that was very promising. We will also be able to overlay some of our infrastructure and social data to better understand where that risk exists. And one of the coolest things that they've done is they've been able to create these individual watersheds for each problem spot of pluvial flooding, which means that we can do precision BMP installation to try to address some of these problems. Otherwise, we are continuing to support CRS for the localities in our region that are engaged in that. And then finally, this is not flooding related, but this is just another resilience effort that we have begun. We have a FEMA grant to map critical infrastructure in the region, just to make all kinds of mitigation planning, climate vulnerability planning, and hazard mitigation planning easier and more flexible for our localities. And that project is also due next summer. And finally, we are the recipient of the CPRG Climate Pollution Reduction Grant from EPA. This was non-competitive funding that was offered to MSAs, states, and tribes to create a climate action plan. There are many deliverables that are expected from this grant over the next 4 years, including a full GHG inventory and GHG modeling, reduction goals for sectors of the economy, short and long-term strategic plans. And then there is implementation money that is set to be released this September, applications due in April. And accessing those funds is tied to the creation of this plan. So our initial steps is creating the steering committee and publishing the RFP for for the contractor to do some of that inventory and modeling work for us. And that will be happening this summer and fall. So that was a lot of information, so I'm here to answer some questions if anybody has any.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Nicole, this is really a 30,000-foot question. After the Clean Water Act, it was always my understanding that by 2025, you had combined sewage stormwater overflow. Every drop of that had to be treated before it was released into the river. And I'm sure that when we get a big rain, there are ramifications for flooding, in 5,000 words or less. How does that fit in with what's going on now? Or have we just given up on that? Because I thought that was a mandate from the federal court saying it's got to be done by 2025. No ifs, ands, or buts.
I don't know about the mandate. I think that's, I wish Sarah was here to answer that question, actually. But you're right that it does impact our flooding and, that the stormwater drainage being overwhelmed, especially by those fast inundations. And especially if we get a rain not long after already having a rain, even if there's not a whole lot of precipitation that falls in volume, if they fall back to back, our sewage system is much more likely to overflow and cause some of that fluvial flooding, so.
That's all being factored into that? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Thank you very much
you
for
and
your,
then-
oh, yes. Thank you very much for your presentation. One of the metrics I think we've been seeing come up more is wet bulb temperature.
Yes.
And I'm curious if, because it's kind of a much more complicated definition of heat and its effectiveness or impactfulness, have you seen whether that is also lining up with red line neighborhoods, if there are still correlations there, and whether those correlations are stronger or weaker, and is that also part of your heat projects?
Yes, I'm so glad you brought this up because I love talking about wet bulb global temperature. And all of our heat study work is going to be in wet bulb global temperature. That the model works with that factor or with that unit. For anybody who doesn't know, wet bulb global temperature takes into account not just the temperature, but also the humidity and also the solar radiance. So typically we measure air temperature in the shade for some reason. Wet bulb global temperature takes that measurement in the sun, so it accounts for what it actually feels like when the sun is hitting your skin, and it takes into account cloud cover and wind speed as well. So it's best to measure directly, but it can be calculated if you have the right meteorological data. And in fact, National Weather Service is working on a new system of warnings that's based on wet bulb global temperature instead of just feels like temperature. So we're making recommendations to that work group to use wet bulb global temperature as the standard for when emergency efforts need to be made to protect health and life. And yes, you're correct that the wet bulb global temperature is higher in the former redlined areas, just as regular feels like temperature is.
Because I know we saw in this latest heat wave, we were seeing like 92, 93, which is very concerning.
Yeah. What typically for wet bulb global temperature 80 is where things start getting a little bit dangerous. So if you're at wet bulb global temperature 90, 92, it's serious.
Hi, on the climate action plan with the
Yes.
greenhouse gas inventory, is that gonna be modeling transportation emissions as well?
Yes.
Oh.
We have to do it for every sector. Well, we have some decisions we have to make. We can either do it as one big accounting for all sectors together and just provide one number, or we can do it by individual sectors. Either way, transportation will be part of that. And it'll kind of be up to the steering committee whether they want to ask the consultant for a consolidated estimation or break it out into different sectors.
Well, I have another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you have the flooding risk, mapping, and I wonder how does that relate to like the current FEMA maps, or maybe you have a.
The FEMA maps are part of this.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
that's where we
Alright.
pulled it from.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all for your attention and excellent questions. I'll hand it over to Katie.
You have to stop
Yes.
sharing.
There you go.
Thank you. So I think Nicole had a good presentation to lead into mine now on emergency management and emergency planning. So hi, everybody. My name is Katie Moody. I'm the Regional Emergency Management Program Coordinator here at Planner VA. I've been in this role since March 2018. I'll talk about what the Emergency Management Alliance is and some of the work I do for this program as part of Planner VA's various program areas. So, go back. This is a map of the Alliance. So the Emergency Management Alliance is actually quite larger than the Planner VA region. We have the core 9 localities here, as you see, but actually we're 25 localities and 5 tribes within the Central Virginia region. It also includes some towns, cities. So it's basically Planner VA region, the Crater PDC region, and then we have a couple localities from 3 other planning district commissions as well. There's a list of those localities here. So I actually do program work and management projects, grant writing, things like that to support all of these localities. So the Alliance is a voluntary association, so we're not a public body or governing body. We're not mandated to meet. So we're a voluntary association of government and key stakeholder organizations that manage emergency preparation, response, relief, recovery, and mitigation in Central Virginia. So that would include, stakeholder groups would include emergency management officials, emergency managers from your localities, as well as our partner organizations. Some of them are also government organizations, but also private sector groups, nonprofit groups. So we span quite a few stakeholder groups. So how did this coalition start, basically? How did we decide to start meeting if we're not a governing or public body? So in 2003, FEMA created the Urban Area Security Initiative program. This was actually following 9/11. There was some money that was basically mandated from Congress to various MSAs and locale regions across the United States to support high-risk areas with emergency preparedness and anti-terrorism resources, basically. So Central Virginia was actually UWASI from 2008 to 2012. We were in that ranking of high-risk areas in the United States that received this UWASI funding. We're no longer a UWASI, but there are 2 other UWASIs in Virginia. Hampton Roads is a UWASI. They have lots of critical infrastructure and other types of infrastructure that make them a higher risk area, as well as the DC area. And then, of course, you've got your major cities like New York City, Boston, those areas that are also considered UWASIs. So our UWASI program ended in 2012, and the group, the Central Virginia UWASI group, decided that they wanted to maintain that partnership and coalition because they felt like it was so important to have all these localities together working on emergency management in Central Virginia. So basically, they just decided to call themselves now Central Virginia Emergency Management Alliance. And then we've rebranded in 2019 and just flipped our letters around. Now we just refer to ourselves as the Alliance to make it easier to say and refer to. And as I mentioned, our members and stakeholders include EMs, first responder and public safety personnel, local government and state officials, as well as tribes. We have nonprofit, private sector partners such as Dominion Energy, lots of voluntary groups like the Red Cross, Salvation Army that also participate. And this is our new logo. Well, new with the planner review part is, so it's almost new. So as I mentioned, when the UASI funding ended for the region, we had quite a bit of funding during that time to support regional projects. We've continued to apply for funding, but it has been through the State Homeland Security Program, which is a competitive program. So every year, mostly me, in Planner VA applies for State Homeland Security grants. Nicole had mentioned in her presentation, she applied for one last year for her critical infrastructure mapping. And so over the past 10 years, we've secured quite a few funds to support our program area or committee areas in planning, organization, exercise, training, and equipment. And so I mentioned that the Alliance is a voluntary group, but what else makes it unique since we're not a governing body necessarily? So it is voluntary, like I mentioned, so everyone who comes together to convene in this coalition chooses to do so based on their own time. So they're not mandated to, so they choose to come together to contribute or to self-convene basically because they believe that emergency management planning in the region is important. So we do have participation from all of our 25 local jurisdictions in the Alliance footprint, as well as our tribes and our other partners, like I mentioned. So the Alliance is unique in the Commonwealth, but really it's unique in the United States that there's no other emergency management groups, self-convening groups, especially that coordinate as closely on as consistent basis that is not dictated by funding. So since we don't have, since we're not a governing body, we do have a charter, a bylaws document. We have an MOU with Planner VA as well as like the state police. And several kind of regional agreements that we use to help basically run our business. And then in addition to that, we provide all of our resources, whether they come through grants or subject matter experts, are relevant region-wide, and any locality can engage and take advantage of our resources, whether they need equipment, they need support. We also have a partnership with the Community Foundation. It helped them set up the Central Virginia COVID-19 Response Fund, which was active during COVID until late 2021. And since we're not a governing body, also there's no requirements on participation from our localities. So there's no fees, no dues, there's no application process to join. Pretty much if you exist in the region, you can participate and take advantage of the resources. So in terms of our business structure, we have a monthly meeting. Actually, it was this morning, right before this meeting, our monthly Alliance meeting. We have them in person as well as virtual, just on Zoom. Of course, we always have the hybrid option for our localities that are over an hour away, you know, Louisa, King William, that it helps us facilitate better participation when we're able to offer that option. We have a chair, a vice chair, a secretary, and a finance officer that are elected every year, and they run the business for the meetings. And so generally the meetings just kind of go through chair's report, updates, committee report outs. We have a round table where anyone who's on the meeting, professionals get to share kind of best practices or updates. They have a big event coming up. And everyone's talking about, you know, National Night Out in August, and of course everyone's talking about the heat, you know, the storms we've had last week. So just we'll have different things, you know, come up, and so it's a great forum to discuss, you know, what's going on in the emergency management world. In addition, we've got 5 standing committees. They meet monthly, and they all have committee chairs and vice chairs that are also appointed. This is a list of our committees here, and I'll briefly go through kind of what the activities are for each committee. And then in addition to that, we have an executive committee that meets monthly that basically works more on strategic planning and strategy for the Alliance. So our Mass Care and Human Services Committee, our partners are mostly in the kind of human services area. So we have social services representatives, health and mental health, voluntary organizations, of course, emergency management professionals. So they focus quite a bit on training and exercise for these groups. Some of our topics include sheltering, feeding and bulk distribution, family assistance centers or recovery centers, following disaster. And then we offer training through our grants for these groups in CPR, first aid, stop and bleed, serve safe food handling training. And this provides an opportunity for these mass care partners to collaborate. We also have a mass care equipment grant through this committee that purchases things like cots, blankets, hygiene supplies for shelters for our localities throughout the region. And also we do pet sheltering training as well. So we buy pet sheltering supplies, which is actually a huge thing. No one thinks about, what you're gonna do with your pets if you have to evacuate. So planning for that is actually a big priority in the region. I know I have like 4 pets, so that's a big planning thing for me as well. So that part, I do enjoy the pet part. Our public outreach committee, as you can imagine, we're talking about informing the public on preparedness and kind of what's going on in the region, what they need to be prepared for. We do outreach through social media campaigns. This is an example of one of our Facebook posts here. And we also do events, trainings for the public. We have a partnership with the Flying Squirrels. It's the longest phone ringer ever. We have a sponsorship that we've done with the Flying Squirrels the last couple of years. We do a preparedness campaign throughout the summer. We have a big preparedness night game. It's actually August 17th this year. Leading up to Preparedness Month in September. So we'll have lots of giveaways and supplies that we'll give out. I've actually got some here, just a small sampling of supplies that we have that we'll give out to the community. We do lots of fun activities. And then we have a preparedness guide that we've developed as well with assistance from Plan RBA, and that copy of that is over there as well if you're interested. Just a couple pictures from our events. Obviously this is the squirrels here with Nutsy and Natasha. That was from a couple years ago. And we also have, we used to do a workshop called Survivor Day. We have not done that since COVID, but that was a region-wide preparedness workshop that we used to do. Where we covered various topics for the general public. Our regional CERT committee, CERT is the Community Emergency Response Team. So this is a volunteer and public-facing committee where they assist localities with resources for their CERT teams, and CERTs help with damage assessment after emergencies. They can help with special events like traffic control, things like that. So we plan activities for our CERT teams, like our skills rodeo exercise. We have classes, things like that we plan throughout the year. There's a couple examples from our localities. One of Chesterfield's CERT classes from 2020, and then this is a training that Henrico was doing in 2019. Planning committee, as the name kind of describes, works on planning projects, frameworks. One example that you all might be aware of is our hazard mitigation plan. So they help sort of do some like project management and subject matter expertise on that. And a couple other of our regional plans. We've got a THIRA, the Threat and Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment documents. We have frameworks and plans for Family Assistance Center planning and Joint Information Center planning, and we house these plans on our SharePoint drive for all of the emergency management professionals to access. So and they're all regional plans as well. Training and Exercise Committee supports training exercises throughout the region. So we have grant funding to help support trainings that maybe the state department emergency management's not able to provide. So we'll identify priorities there to hold regional trainings, and maybe there's some staff in a locality that needs support to send some individuals to training, we can help do that as well. This is a picture from the triennial airport exercise that was held at the airport, April 2019. I was actually at that exercise. I was not one of the victims on the mat thing, but basically this is, I think the simulation was that like a plane caught on fire and they had to, all the public safety personnel had to practice, putting out the fire, then rescuing the people out of the plane. So it was pretty neat to watch. This is a new asset we have in the region now. This is our Regional Exercise Support Unit trailer. We obtained this trailer, actually Hopewell Fire and EMS donated the trailer, and then we used state Homeland Security funds to purchase equipment to go in the trailer. So any locality could request it. Obviously they'd have to go pick it up and take it to their location, but they can request it. We have a really detailed sign out process and how to use the equipment in the trailer. There's all kinds of stuff, traffic cones, tables, chairs, cameras, anything you can think of you might need, projectors to use for a training or an exercise. And then we recently got it wrapped, so it's got a pretty neat, if you go on the Alliance Facebook page, you'll see more photos, but it's got a pretty neat wrap now with our logo and some of our info, kind of like an advertisement billboard sort of thing. And then briefly going over our partnership with the Community Foundation. So we had created that prepared COVID-19 response fund. It originally was created as a preparedness fund in 2019, just knowing that we didn't have a regional fund to supplement government or like FEMA funds that might come in the event of a disaster. So that fund was active from March 2020 till September 2021. I was actually on the fund advisory committee for that fund. So we met every week to review requests that had come in from regional organizations that needed support during COVID. So we gave out over 200 awards and over $6 million were distributed in 16 localities. And so this partnership was really great and unique because normally in the Community Foundation's footprint is just, it's smaller, it's just the same size as the Planner VA footprint actually. So through our partnership with the Alliance, they were able to expand to all these smaller localities outside of the foundation to be able to support them. And then here are the officers on our executive committee and their various roles and localities. And of course, my contact information. There's some links in here. Our plansafe.org website is our public facing preparedness site if you're interested in downloading checklists or the guidebook. And then some links to our brochure, which is also over here on the table, as well as the COVID-19 Response Fund Impact Report. That's kind of has that graphic I just showed you, but in much more detail. And that's all I have. If you all have questions.
Can't help myself. Good presentation, Katie.
Thank you.
Two questions. One, I saw a real emphasis on natural disasters as opposed to hazmat. I think about Palestine, Ohio, with Norfolk Southern derailment. Are you all doing anything related to man-made disasters? Especially Hopewell and all those factories.
Yeah.
Second piece is from a transportation standpoint. I see the gates on I-64 for emergency evacuation to get people out of there. Does VDOT make that call? Do they coordinate with you to make that call to shut down 64? So maybe address those, please.
Which one should I do first? I'll do the man-made disasters one first. So technically all of our grant funding is through, is with the intention of anti-terrorism mitigation. So really, I guess the purpose is for man-made disasters. To that specifically, there are some localities, including Crater, Hopewell specifically, that has done commodity flow studies. So basically, they work with CSX to evaluate what types of hazardous materials come through the region. I believe Richmond, the city of Richmond is actually applying for a grant project for next year to do one within the city as well. So they'll assess on the interstate, like what types of materials are coming through. Obviously, if we know during a certain time of year that these types of materials are coming through, and then if an accident happens and then something blows up, and we'll kind of know like what's gonna happen. So there is definitely there's been a bigger interest in that for sure, doing those studies. So it kind of has to start with that, and then I guess any type of policies that would come out or changes to either transportation in terms of infrastructure or regulations would probably come out of that. Hopefully that answers your question and sort of how we're thinking about it. In terms of I-64, so I believe that would be VDOT, but the New Kent County Emergency Management and likely Henrico would probably be coordinating with VDOT in terms of if there were an evacuation and they needed to, adjust the dates or whatever.
But is there a channel with this group to coordinate that, or?
No, I don't do that specifically.
Okay.
I do mostly on the preparedness side, but the kind of like the response and sort of the locality specific, area specific, it would be them. I mean, it'd probably be something I would be aware of though, but yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The certifications that you mentioned, CPR and ServSafe, how can someone access that? And then also to, I do a lot of outreach and events, especially in the red line communities that you mentioned. Would you be the contact person to come and maybe set up a table and offer some of these supplies?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll speak to more detail. So for outreach, so we actually have a form that you can request supplies and materials as well as outreach support. So if you need someone from like our outreach committee to come out and help set up a table, then we can do that. And of course, like our staff here at Planner VA help with that as well. And we have, there's a small sample of supplies here, but we've got all kinds of stuff. So if it's more of a kid-focused event, we've got kid supplies, coloring books. If it's a pet-focused event, we've got pet preparedness supplies. And then we've just got like lots of general things. So we can work with you definitely here at Planner VA to help get stuff you need like for an event. Help kind of cater supplies you might need to what you're trying to do. And what was your first question?
Accessing those certifications, services,
Yeah.
CPR.
So we typically offer those trainings to our mass care partners because our grant scope is specific to mass care enhancement. So you would have to probably be an employee or a staff member who was receiving the training with the intention of being able to use it for some type of mass care related activity, whether it was working in a shelter or providing feeding in a shelter. So you would get the ServSafe maybe if you were like a DSS staff member who might be helping serving food or something like that. So it is really available to anyone, any locality, but we make sure that those staff people getting trained are for our grant accountability purposes, used for that purpose. So.
Yeah, I have a quick question, and then I think Kelly Rowan has a question online.
Okay.
So just to follow up to your question, do you have like a calendar of things that would be accessible to members of the public maybe who wanted to get trained, or that doesn't quite happen?
So you're talking about public facing trainings,
Yeah,
like
something
CPR?
like that for emergency folks.
Yeah, so most are, I would say probably our public facing training right now, it's mostly through the squirrels. It's kind of like our big initiative, and so we're not doing as much training right now, especially since COVID. A lot of localities don't have the staff capacity to offer frequent training for public and for the general public, at the libraries or schools or wherever. So we try to focus like on the squirrels and just kind of like being present to be able to offer information, things like that. But I do know some specific localities might advertise CPR or Stop the Bleed, or there used to be a regional Stop the Bleed coalition. I was actually an instructor on that, where we'd have public classes. I think Bon Secours organized that. Like once a month, we'd have a class somewhere at a school that the public could access. So I would probably start with your specific locality first, because they might have a more comprehensive offerings on training. But in terms of region-wide training that we are organizing Planner VA with the Alliance, we don't have a calendar right now because we're mostly kind of doing outreach events. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. Kelly?
I think I can.
Kelly, can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you. Well, thank you guys. I'm Kelly, representing the Office of Equitable Transit and Mobility. I have a million questions, but I tried to boil it down to two.
Okay.
I'm gonna ask the first one first. And I'm not 100% sure how to ask it, other than saying, have we, as a region, been looking at like the people side of resiliency? Like, I think during COVID, we had, all of these people that were unable to work in our food production systems, unable to drive trucks. And we talk a lot about like redundancy of physical assets, but like not as much redundancy of people assets. So I guess that's my first question. Is that something that we're working on?
Kelly, I think, are you asking about an individual's vulnerability to a natural hazard?
No, more like our system's vulnerability to when a large group of people experiences a disaster. So like during COVID, when the chicken plants couldn't operate, or we didn't have people that were willing to drive the trucks to distribute our goods, or they were being subject to regulations that were not allowing them to deliver and to operate. So just thinking of like the people, the soft side of redundancy.
Right. It's something that's on my mind, but I can't say that we have any initiatives underway right now to try to plan for that. We're right now just focusing on filling some of our data gaps for more of the systemic versions of resilience and kind of addressing the immediate loss of health and life to some of those events. But yeah, it's definitely something that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I don't know what the solution is. And it's on my mind. Like, I feel like the transit driver shortage and these other where we're like, we can have the money and we can have the infrastructure, but if we don't have systems in place to ensure that we have the people to operate it. So I appreciate your honesty in that. And I guess I'll just say, let's all keep using our brains on that one. My other question, and maybe it's for Nicole and Chet kind of too, and it's more back to the first question or the first presentation. So, we're working on Richmond Connect. We have recommendations where we've identified areas that are in high heat zones, that are in flooding risk. And we include things like use lighter pavement or permeable pavement when possible. And, we should install cooling stations at bus stops and those sort of things, trying to think of what are ways we can incorporate these, these facts that we know about heat and flooding. But from a regional standpoint, and that's why I say maybe it's for Chet and Nicole, really, that like, are we going to, and do we require the assessment of the use of those materials in the programming process? Or is that going to be incorporated into the programming process at some point where it's like, if you're in a high flooding zone, you have to first consider this, this type of impervious top inch, or, you have to consider this depth of impervious, or like some guidelines?
So I think we can make best practice recommendations, but those kind of requirements would be up to the individual localities to adopt. But
Or VDOT.
or VDOT, yeah.
Do we have a guidelines on, or maybe that's going to be an output of your process, Nicole, on that work, is like the action items for like, here's what we should do in our project as we're administering public federal dollars. We should include these types of features to mitigate those things.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of general best practice guidelines out there already, but I do think especially with the, the heat analysis, part of what we're doing is identifying where specifically those kind of things should be prioritized, right? The menu of actions is also something that I'm kind of developing of like, here's long-term things you can do that we should start now, but are not going to give us any kind of relief immediately. Here's some medium-term things we should think about, and then here's some short-term actions we can do to protect ourselves right now. Does that answer your question, Kelly? That's a good question, though. Did that get to what you were asking?
Yeah, I think so. I just feel like we could institute at all these different levels. So the city of Richmond will say, okay, anywhere we're in these heat island effects, we adopt something that says it has to, any new pavement has to include these features, and anything that doesn't carry over X weight has to include this permeable surface. And then like if that was at the regional level too, and then we could get the state. I'm dreaming, but I'm just thinking of how we can get it embedded in the processes. I feel like sometimes it's not intentional, it just gets lost.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, let's do this multi-use path here, and then it just gets lost that this is cutting through a previously redlined area that should have, these heat and pervious pavement considerations.
Yeah, I think it would be great if if localities would adopt some regulations to require that kind of thing. But yeah, right now all we can do is make the right people aware. This is a data and information kind of campaign, and hope that those things don't get lost in the sauce, if you will. Especially when we build something, a new piece of infrastructure that's kind of like a set way we go about doing it. So now we have to start getting used to considering the new normal and kind of upending some of those previous assumptions of how things are done. Like that example I was giving earlier about the Silver Spring Cool Streets initiative that I saw a presentation on just recently. The contractor on that project, after they did their heat study of the heat retention of different materials, went back and completely redid their own plan that they were giving to the city, because they realized that the kind of automatic recommendations of what a nice downtown looks like, with dark concrete and red brick and all these kind of aesthetics things were creating a problem. And so they edited their own recommendations to address those issues. So yeah, I think it's a data and education thing for now.
Thank you.
Other questions?
So Kelly's question actually reminded me that I think a lot of the discussion is focused around finding or informing adaptive measures. And I think I'm primarily interested in mitigative measures. And I'm curious if these studies and other programs are working towards mitigative measures that would help inform things like project selection and plan development, that would say, like, reducing VMT is a mitigative measure that has direct impacts on climate, direct impacts on greenhouse gas emissions, or building transit, which is both related to and separate from reducing VMT. Is there a pipeline here to roll this new data into those recommendations and say that transit is good for these reasons and also for these climate change reasons?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope, right? Through that CPRG project, we will be asking participants in that steering committee to agree on greenhouse gas reduction goals and measures, and the deliverables of that plan are a priority and a comprehensive suite of measures that the localities say the unfortunate thing is there's no stick to that program. It's all fees, but the goal is we're supposed to agree on a certain amount of reduction across across all sectors, and then individual suites of reduction measures, and then that is what is eligible for that implementation funding. So there's a little bit of a carrot there on that, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and then I have a final question, I guess for you all, for both of you. Are there any dates or upcoming things you can think of where public participation might be available, people can get involved, or something like a newsletter for the emergency management of Central VA or anything like that?
We have our preparedness night at the Diamond on August 17th. I think I mentioned that. If obviously you enjoyed the squirrels and baseball, you can come visit us there, and we'll have lots going on. And then on September 6th, we have another game at the Squirrels. It's a Wednesday. It's actually RVA community night, and we'll have tickets available. We'll have a lot of tickets available for our Plan RVA partners. And so Plan RVA will be out there with possibly some other partners. But also we're gonna be doing a pet preparedness night that's rescheduled from June, because our June night got rained out. So we'll have a big presence on those 2 dates in terms of emergency management. We don't have an emergency management newsletter. We have like an internal kind of weekly training update, but I'll keep that in mind if we do decide to sort of do something more public facing.
And the resilience program, we don't have our own channel either, but our updates are frequently in the Plan RVA newsletter and the Plan RVA blog. So if you follow that, you'll see our updates as well. And I don't have dates yet, but there is a very heavy public outreach component of that CPRG 4-year effort. So keep your eyes and ears out for those announcements as well. Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, other business, so yes, thank you for the presentations. For future meeting topics, you all can see those on page 10 of this. So our next meeting will be September 21st, and we've got some affordable housing and transportation needs scheduled.
Right.
And then for November, Chesterfield Route 360 Super Street Study.
Again, and those are tentative at this point, so we hope to, proceed along these lines. Don't have anything scheduled beyond that. If there are particular topics that the committee would like to have in a particular sequence, I'd appreciate some input on that. And if you have some other topics you'd like to add to this list, since our last meeting, I've added the last 3 under safety. I think it's Tam's suggestion. So if there are other topics, I would welcome those as well.
Our organization, we put out a report each year called the State of Transit, where we look at our progress when it comes to the 2040 vision plan that was established in 2017. I know there's been some revisions for that plan, but what we like to do is every year show our progress.
Right.
We've put out that report. I would love to present that report. We also have another report that we're doing for Zero Fare and the impacts it has had on our region. That's another opportunity that we could talk about. I'd love to share.
Okay, thank you. Amanda,
Can I, I didn't see anything on here about personal mobility. I've been hearing little bits and pieces about the bike share, about the scooters and all that. I'd love to know what the numbers are like, what the trends are, and where that's going right now.
okay. Got it.
I want to apologize for this. It's brand new and I don't understand it. I've been a member of this organization for many, many years, long before any of you people. And I've seen a lot of transition take place. But years ago, for a number of years, we had a chairman who was from Charles City, who was a member of the Indian Tribe Nations of Virginia. I don't know how it comes, but I would like to see this. If somewhere or another we could have a representative from the tribal nations from Virginia in this area be a member of this organization. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Ridgewine, and I would, just to follow up on that, we have been kind of struggling to fill some of our vacancies. Right now, Henrico has no representation on this committee. I have been in touch with the county about that, and they say they're working on it, but progress has been very slow there. There are a number of other vacancies, both primary representatives as well as alternates. So would ask for you all support and anything that you all can do to help encourage your respective jurisdictions and other jurisdictions to appoint representatives.
Yeah, and I would add that I think Lisa and other chairs before me have done a good job at expanding this committee, and you all have done. But if you have ideas for how to do that, and once we have a more concrete idea from the policy board of how we can be the most beneficial and the most useful with our community time, I think maybe we can think about expanding or adding members here. So please let us know. Kelly, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, if you can find it in your budget, people that aren't gonna be paid by their organization to attend the meeting, we have found it kind of a best practice to offer a stipend for people to attend. So if you're gonna ask somebody to come, pay them, we all get paid to be here. That's my first comment, a thought on that. Second comment is I would also love to see like an Indigenous community representative. But I will say that, you know, when I have contacted some of those organizations in the past, they have been fairly hesitant to want to be involved. But you find somebody that's really willing, I would love to have their contact.
Okay. Thank you. Member comments, next meeting.
Yeah. Does anyone have any member comments they would like to add? Discussion.
I just want to point out that Katie and I have our cards over here, if anybody would like to grab one to contact us later, follow up on anything, they're on the table.
I have a small one, a kind of in-house thing. Virginia Cowles, who used to be the League of Women Voters representative, sometimes she's on our calls. She lives in Alexandria now. She took Amtrak down, took public transportation to her hotel, and then the League of Women Voters did a kind of a expedition on the BRT last weekend, and she did that, took public transportation back to her hotel, and it was really neat. It was really impressive for people who know Virginia who's over 80 or 85. That's it.
Cool. All right, our next meeting is September 21st.
Yep.
See you all then. Should we motion to adjourn?
I think this is by consensus.
All right.